All right, Trabosai, good evening. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share, to thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Steve and Teri Czinn, for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in memory of Steve's father, Bunim, Tzvi ben Chaim, Leah Sol, as a zechus refuah sheleimah for her daughter Ilana Bas Esther, and for all of those wounded in Eretz Yisroel. Yonason Rachel Wolff for a complete and lasting refuah for Refuel Yitzchak Baruch ben Eliezer. Jerry and Sora Wolasky in the zechus for refuah sheleimah for their grandson Zecharya Dov ben Perel Shira. Azriel and Iris Miller in the zechus of the holy soldiers of the IDF, and the merit of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisroel. Daf Yomi sponsorship today, Jacob Blumenfeld, in honor of the amazing accomplishment of a very special person in being Messiah, maseches, kiddushin, and seder nashim. Okay, it doesn't identify who the very special person is, but as long as he knows and the intended person knows, then Baruch Hashem, a mazel tov to this incredibly special person, and as well as a mazel tov to all of us in Eretz Hashem. Upcoming siyum, by the way, opportunity a week from this Motzei Shabbos, November 18th. I don't know the time. We put out to save the date 8 o'clock. 8:15 in Eretz Hashem was going to be a beautiful siyum, an uplifting siyum. Again, hopefully more information to follow about that today. And I will say, again, I've neglected to mention it. Over the last couple of days. But as I put out on Erev Shabbos, we are dedicating this masechta in memory of Master Sergeant Eliyahu Michael Harush, who I mentioned on Shabbos. He was one of the first police officers killed in sderot. And we had the opportunity to meet his wife, an incredible woman. And the truth is, I'll send out, we have a short video from our trip about the interview. She spoke to the group for a couple of moments, and she's absolutely cut from a different cloth, as they say. And Sergeant Harush was someone who valiantly fought against the Hamas terrorists before anyone knew what was going on. And they say there's no doubt that his actions saved thousands of people within the city of Sderot. So really a tzaddik who died al Kiddush Hashem. And, we're all looking to know, things that we could do for our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisroel. So actually, on the way back, Rabbi Motzer from there, we're talking about that we should dedicate maseches Baba Kamma in his memory. So we started a WhatsApp chat with Mrs. Harush, and just telling her that Baruch Hashem, that there are shuls that are dedicating their learning to her husband, and her reaction has been so incredible. So incredible. She's not interested in other things, but the fact that there are Jews 6,000 miles away providing or concerned with providing an aliya for the neshama of her husband is something that she feels is a chizuk for herself and for her children. So we should hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, that this precious Jew's neshama should have an aliyah. He died al Kiddush Hashem. So the truth is, a person who dies al Kiddush Hashem ascends right to the Kisei HaKavod. Should be a melis Yosha for his mishpacha, and our Torah should not only propel his neshama maila, but Eretz Hashem should be a chizuk for his mishpacha as well. So with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. A really incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is daf Hey. We are picking up in Eretz Hashem on Daled Amud Beis 4b. And we are picking up in Eretz Hashem Tani Rabbi Chia. So we are picking up, it is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom. Suppose this is just to orient ourselves a little bit. So if you remember again, in our Mishnah, we had Arba Avos Nezikim, 4 primary categories of damages. Rabbi Shia then highlighted that there were 13 categories of Nezikim. Comes along Rabbi Chia, Tani Rabbi Chia, Esrim va'arba avos nezikin. There are 24 categories of nezikin. Now remember again, based on what I said yesterday, what does it mean when we talk about that there's all these categories of nezikin? So remember, what they're counting, so to speak, as primary categories of nezikin is pretty much wherever the Torah itself explicitly discusses damages or responsibility for damages, they're calling that a primary category. So Rabbi Chia said this 24. What makes up the 24? So first of all, so obviously everybody's building on each other. So remember again, he's got the 13 of Rabbi Shia, right? Which is the 4 of the Mishnah, and then another 9 of Rabbi Shia. And now watch this, including in that he has in Tashlume Kefel, the double payment for stealing an object, Tashlume Arba v'chamisha, 4 and 5 times payment for when you steal an ox or a sheep. Because you also remember again, these are all cases where halacha l'maaseh you've done something wrong and there's compensatory damages that have to be paid. Ganov, Gazlon. So we'll say, so again, Rashi goes through all of these. If you look at Rashi for just a moment, Rashi says over here, first wide line, Rashi says, Tashlume Kefel, when do you pay double payment? If you steal something, and then you are found, in other words, your stolen item is found with you, you have to pay kefel. Tashlumi arba lechamisha is a case, again, where you steal an ox or a sheep, you steal it, you sell it, or you slaughter it, right? Ganov, or Ganov, Rashi says, V'ganov, shemeshalim alpi atzmo, ve'enu meshalim kefel, ele karen bilbat. So also the case of a Ganov is where a person steals, admits that they stole, and then they repay. But remember again, if you admit that you stole, you don't have to pay kefil, you don't have to pay double, but rather again, you just pay keren. You just pay principal. So that's the case of Ganov. Gazlon, Rashi says over here, third wide line, Nami afu dichsiv v'heshav v'sagzila sher gazal. Okay? So we'll say, so again, a Gazlon, remember the difference between a Ganov and a Gazlon is a Ganov steals surreptitiously, and a Gazlon is a bit more brazen. So again, Gazlan, the Eidim Zomin. So also remember again, Eidim Zomin. Halacha Maisa, again, witnesses testify that they saw, Ruvain steal from Shimon $100, and it turns out that again, Imanu Hayisem. We don't discredit that they're lying. We just discredit. We discredit them that they're lying, but we discredit them by lying by telling them you could not have witnessed the event. You claim to witness because you were with us. So remember again, they have to pay reciprocal punishment. Eidim Zomin. Ones, a man who violates a woman. Mefata, a man who seduces a woman. So we'll say here there are financial penalties. Motzi Shemra. Motzi Shemra is a man who marries a woman and then after the marriage claims that she was not a besula. She wasn't a besula. Vahamitame. So we'll say mitame is actually interesting. This is someone who intentionally makes someone else's truma tameya. So I have a friend who was a Kohen, or he used to be my friend, right? And then what happens, we have a little bit of a falling out, and I decide, you know what, I'm going to get him, I'm metame his truma. I make his truma tame. Right? I drop just a little sheretz right into that pile of truma, now his truma's tameya. Or midamea. So we'll say, so medama. So medama Rashi says over here, someone who kind of does the same type of thing, but in the reverse. So instead, I have a Yisrael, former friend, who I'm looking to really give it to. So what do? I drop a little bit of truma into his chulin. They'll say, that's the problem. The problem is truma is not bottle, right? Truma is not bottle. So therefore, again, once it gets mixed into his chulin, essentially, he can no longer eat his chulin. Okay. V'haminasech. Nasech is I take someone's wine and I use it as a libation for avodah zarah, right? Chas v'shalom. So we'll say, so again, so these are v'hani tleisar. So we'll say, so remember again, so now, I have all of these, plus the previous 13 of Rabbi Shmuel. So the Gemara says, Ha, Esrim Ba'arba. So now we have 24 avos nezikin, 24 primary categories of damages. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, my time of Lotaniani. So we'll say, so again, okay, all makes sense, although we are going to see what's interesting about some of these Ravosai is as follows. Remember, in the world of payment, we're going to talk about this in just a moment. There's two different types of payment you can make. There's what's called mammon and there's knas. Right? Mammon means financial payment. Knas means penalty payment. Knas is not mammon. Knas, a penalty, is something just an objective amount that the Torah decided you have to pay that is not necessarily related to compensatory damages. Versus mammon, which is there's a valuation. It's compensatory damages. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. But the point the Gemara makes over here is, Rabbi Shia, my time with Tani Hake. Rabbi Shia, I don't understand. We thought Rabbi Shia was great with his 13 categories. Why doesn't Rabbi Shia subscribe to Rabbi Chia's 24 categories? Right? Why not go? Why doesn't he hold like this? To which the Gemara says, very simple. So the Gemara says, my time with Tani Hani, b'mamona kamari b'knasa lo kamari. Here it is. Because we'll say Rabbi Shia was only counting cases of mammon. He wasn't counting cases of knas, of penalty payments. So we'll say, how do you in general in halacha, how do you know there's a knas payment and a mammon payment? Knas payment is usually fixed and doesn't take into regard the parties involved. As opposed to a mammon payment where there's a valuation. Mammon often also has different buckets of payment, as we saw in yesterday's daf. So the Gemara says, because I'm fine, Ganav a Gazan Mammon who listening, but one second. Not everything in that list is knas. So when you go back, for example, when you go back and you look at that list, I will say, so definitely there could be things on here that are knas. For example, mefata, right? Mefata or ones, a man seduces or violates a woman. There, the Torah provides an objective amount that the seducer or violator has to pay to the father of the girl, irrespective of who she is, of who he is, of the circumstances. Salach l'maisa b'pashtos, that's a knas. That's a knas. But let's say ganov or gazlan, when you steal something and then you have to pay, right? B'pashtos, that's not knas. That's not knas. That is mamon. That's compensatory damages. So why doesn't Rabbi Shmuel at least include that? To which the Gemara says he does. Hakatoni le shomer chinam v'hashoel. He does talk about ganav and gazlan. But I will say, when does Rabbi Shmuel talk about theft? Remember again, in Rabbi Shmuel's categories, what did he include? He included a shomer chinam, right, an unpaid custodian, and a shoel, and a borrower. He also included a paid custodian. I will say, included in those categories is what? Liability for theft. Now, not for a shomer chinam, but for a shoel and for a socher, right? For a shoel, for a borrower, or for a shomer sacher, for a paid custodian, there is liability for theft. So he does include that. He just doesn't call it theft. Okay. Rabbi Chia nami hatanale. Rabbi Chia nami hatanale. Hashomer chinam v'ashoel. So I will say, so ultimately, in Rabbi Chia, why doesn't he include the cases ultimately? So I'm sorry, Rabbi Chia, if that's the case, so remember, I will say, Rabbi Chia is building Rabbi Shia. So now what you just told me is, when Rabbi Shia talks about the cases of a shomer sacher, or a shomer chinam, or a shoel, that includes ganov and gazlan. If that's the case, then why does Rabbi Chia need to mention them explicitly, right? In other words, if shomer chinam and shoel includes the cases of theft, fine, then remember again, Rabbi Chia is building Rabbi Shia. So why the need to mention theft independently? So the Gemara says once again, so Rabbi Chia, nami hatana shomer chinam v'ashal. So Rabbi Chia, okay, so you already have shomer chinam and shol because you're building on Rabbi Shia's list, and you're telling me now that those cases include theft. If that's the case, why the need to include ganav and gazlan? To which the Gemara says, Tani mamona da asli adei behetera, v'katani mamona da asli adei be'isura. Because Rabbi says it's interesting. Rabbi Chia is trying to be mechalik, is trying to distinguish between cases where money came to your hand legally versus cases where money came to your hand illegally. What does this mean? See, Rabbi say, in the case of a shomer, whether it's a paid custodian, an unpaid custodian, a borrower, or a renter, in those cases, the object in question came to your hand in a permitted way. Now, obviously, if it's stolen, then there's liability. That's different than the case of ganav and gazlan, where what? Where ultimately, again, the object came to your hand in a prohibited fashion, right? You never had any rights. You never had any rights, ultimately, again, to go ahead and have it. So I will say, so just, again, so it's interesting. It kind of turns out that according to Rabbi Chia, you may actually have some level of redundancy in cases, but l'maisa, because they're in different ways, they're mechanistically different. One is a heter case, so to speak, and one is an isser case. He reckons them both. Interesting. Okay. So the Gemara goes weiter. Good. Top of hay. 5a. Eidim zomin timamono who listening. So we'll say. So remember again, we're still focused on a simple question over here, which is Rabbi Yoshia had 13 cases, right, which were the 4 of the Mishnah plus an additional 9. Rabbi Chia ultimately again has 24 cases, which were the 14 cases of Rabbi Shia and an additional 10. So I'll say, so now we're trying to figure out why doesn't Rabbi Shia have the additional cases of Rabbi Chia? That's our question. So first answer we gave is that Rabbi Shia was really only focused on mammon and ultimately again not knas. He was only counting cases of where we're dealing with actual compensatory damages and not penalty payments. Okay, so then remember, just to follow the flow. So the Gemara said, what about gazlan? What about ganav and gazlan? Right, theft cases. That's mamon. That's not knas. To which the Gemara answered, you're right. Rabbi Shia actually did include those cases. He just didn't call it ganav and gazlan. What did he call it? Shomer chinam, shomer sacher. He called those custodial cases. Because in custodial cases, again, depending on the custodial case, there will be liability for theft. Fine. So now the Gemara asks, again, Rabbi Shia, what about idim zomin? why don't you, Rabbi Shia, why didn't you include the case of Eidim Zomamin? Now, Rabbi say, why? Timamonahu, because Eidim Zomamin is a case of Mamon. Now, this is actually very interesting. So, Rabbi say, now remember again, what's the penalty? What's the penalty of Eidim Zomamin? Vasisem lo kasher zomim lasos la'achid. Right? Reciprocal punishment. Whatever the Eidim Zomamin wanted to try to do to the person they're testifying about, that's what we do to them. So the Gemara says that's a Mamon case. Look at Rashi. Eidim Zomin de Mamon, who is actually interesting. The Cholam Shalim Yoser al Minas Shehise Kegon Kefel Tashlumi Arba V'Chamisha Kari Knas Kidel Kamon Bach Pirkin Ukigon Kol Davar Katzuf HaOmer Batorah Kegon Chamishim Shalonis Umefata Umeesha Motzi Shemra Kulu Havi Knasa Avamidi Achron Mamona. So we'll say this is very interesting. So Rashi says, what is the definition of Knas? The definition of Knas, he says, is twofold. Either whenever you have to pay more than what you've damaged. So the paradigmatic example of that is, I steal Reuben's sheep and I slaughter it and sell it. So what's the halacha? I have to pay 5 times the value of what I stole. So Rabbi say, that is not mamon. That is not mamon. That's knas. That clearly is that's a slap. Right? That's a patch. So that's a penalty payment. However, we'll say, or as he mentioned over here, when it's a fixed payment, a man violates a woman, there is a 50 silver piece penalty payment that you have to pay. It's fixed. It's fixed. It doesn't take into account who the parties are. Anything that's either inflated or fixed, ultimately, again, that's a knas. But anything, I will say, that is reflective of that which was actually perpetrated, that's mamon. So, for example, Eidim Zomamin, where Allah the Eidim have to pay exactly what they did, or they suffer the punishment of what they did, that's called mamon. Okay, so if it's mamon, if Eidim Zomamin is mamon, then at the end of the day, Rabbi Shia, why didn't you include it in your list? To which the Gemara says, "Savlak Rabbi Akiva," because ultimately, again, he holds like Rabbi Shia holds like Rabbi Akiva. The Amar ein mishalmin alpi atzman. Eidim Zomamin, Rabbi say, cannot pay based on their own admission. Based on admission, look at Rashi. Savlak Rabbi Akiva, Tar maseches makas parakamana Eidim Zomamin ein mishalmin alpi atzman kigon. Im huzma bezdin zevelo hispek bal din lahamida bendin uletovan v'halchu Huz menu bevezdin shel ploni upturin alma knasahu umode beknas pater. I as well say a lot of stuff being thrown our way. There's another interesting halacha by knas. What's the interesting halacha by knas? If you admit it, you are freed from liability. What we call mode beknas pater. So let me just illustrate this in a simple way. I stole Reuven's sheep. I go ahead and I slaughter it and I sell it. So now I have a 5-time penalty payment hanging over me. If I show up in Beis Din and I say, Hashamnu baganu, I stole the sheep, I did this, we'll say, I am pater from the knas. This concept of modib knas pater. So watch this. So Eidim Zomamin, Rabbi Akiva holds, who holds Eidim Zomamin, that if witnesses admit in Beis Din that they could, either one of two cases, either that they were made Eidim Zomamin in a different Beis Din, but ultimately the Beis Din never had the opportunity to carry out punishment, or that they admit that they could not have seen what they saw because they were somewhere else, they don't have to pay the payment, the Eidim Zomamin payment, which shows you that what? Anytime you admit something, and your admission paters you, exempts you, what does that show you? What are we dealing with? A knas. So I will say, so therefore, again, what the Gemara is suggesting over is Rabbi Oshia, holds like Rabbi Akiva, who holds that Eidim Zomamin who admit liability are freed from liability, which shows that what? Eidim Zomamin are knas. And if Eidim Zomamin are knas, then what? The Rabbi Oshia is not reckoning knas cases. He is only going ahead and focusing on mamon cases. Incredible. So the Gemara says, fine. Well, 1 second. So let's go back. Right? So fine. Rabbi Shia got this. If Rabbi Shia, you're holding like Rabbi Akiva, then 1 second, in yesterday's daf, Rabbi Akiva made a different distinction. Rabbi Akiva said, Lisni trei gavni shar. In Rabbi Akiva's worldview, there are actually 2 different cases of shar. What are the 2 different cases of shar? Lisne shar da azik shar, but lisne shar da azik adam. Both say Rabbi Akiva splits the cases of shar hamazik, of damaging acts, into 2 categories. There's the case of a shar that damages another shar, and there's the case of a shar that damages a person. So Rabbi say, so remember, Rabbi Shia doesn't make that distinction, right? Rabbi Shia just has the case, ultimately, again, of shar. So, as we'll say, what the Gemara is just trying to do is, remember, just to follow the flow. Rabbi Oshia, 13 cases. Rabbi Chia, 24 cases. We're just wondering why Rabbi Oshia is not on board with Rabbi Chia's 24 cases. Excuse me. Answer number one, simple answer. Rabbi Oshia has a lot of knas cases, and Rabbi Chia has a lot of knas cases. Rabbi Oshia is only counting mamon cases, not knas cases. What about Gan of Gazlan? That's mamon. He's got Gan of Gazlan. Where does he have it? It's under the shomrim cases. Right? Under, again, Shomer Chinam, Shomer Sachar. Good. What about Eidim Zomamin? Right? That's a mamon case. He holds like Rabbi Akiva by Eidim Zomin, that Eidim Zomin who admit liability are exempt from liability. Anytime you admit liability and exempt liability, that's not mamon, that's knas. Okay, you hold like Rabbi Akiva. Well, by shar, Rabbi Akiva has two categories of liability. Rabbi Akiva has liability of shar that damages a shar and shar that damages a person. So why don't you include those two categories in your listing? This none. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Af tam shechava ba'adam shalim b'mosar nezek shalim. Rabbi Akiva holds that even a tam, right? Even a tam, a first-time offender that damages a person is going to pay nezek shalim. It's going to pay nezek shalim. To which the Gemara says, Hatavre Rabbi Akiva ligazize. So we'll say, here's the problem. Rabbi Akiva himself undid or shattered, literally again, that very statement. Why? Disanya, Rabbi Akiva Omer Yachal Af Tam Shechava Ba'adam Yishalim Min Aliya. You might have thought that even a tam, we'll say, remember again, a tam is a first-time offender animal. Even a tam that damaged a person maybe should pay from the best property. Min Aliya means from the best property. Talmud Lomar, Ya'aselo Migufo Mishalim. So we'll say the pasuk when talking about liability ultimately again says Kamishpat Hazeh Ye'aseh Lo. Ye'aseh Lo. And Rabbi Akiva understands that Lamaisa Lo means migufo, from the body of the damaging animal. That's liability is ultimately. We'll say this is a bigger discussion. We touched on it. I don't remember if it was yesterday or on Sunday, but we touched on this concept that in general, right, is there a cap on damages? In other words, is there such a concept that maybe damages are capped at the value of the damaging animal, or no? Damages are damages, and even if they exceed the value of the damaging animal, the damager still has to pay. So again, that's embedded. We're going to get to all of this in Eretz Hashem, but the point is Rabbi Akiva himself seems to contradict and undo his own shita. Because at first, ultimately again, Rabbi Akiva says, even a tam, right, that damages a person is going to have to pay nezek shalim, complete damages, and he says ultimately again, b'mosar. B'mosar means even if those damages exceed the value of the damaging animal. And then in the Bryce, Rabbi Akiva contradicts himself, seems to mute that position and says no, that a tam that goes ahead, you might have thought that a tam that damages a person should have to pay min aliyah from the best property even if it exceeds the value of the damaging animal. Talmud lomar ya'aselo migufo mishalim ve'eno mishalim min aliyah. Ultimately, again, we'll discuss this, but halacha l'maisa seems to be, according to Rabbi Akiva, that halacha l'maisa, that damages are capped at the value of the damaging animal. But we'll talk about that. So we'll say, we're still going back there. So we'll say, this is interesting. So now the Gemara, we're still, remember, the good thing about Baba Kamma is that we're really, we pick up on a question, and literally, again, we just don't let it go. Right? In other words, as you see over the last couple of days, pretty much each blot is really dedicated to the resolution of one question. So here, we're hyper-focused. Rabbi Oshia, you only counted 13 categories. Rabbi Chia has 24 categories. Why don't you agree with the categories of Rabbi Chia? So remember again, so we'll say, the Gemara gave an overarching answer. The overarching answer is Rabbi Chia included a lot of cases of knas, of penalty payments, and Rabbi Oshia is not counting penalty payment cases, he's only counting mamon cases. Fine. So we'll say, now watch this. What about the case of ones, mefata, mosi shemra? So we'll say, remember again, ones is the case of a man who violates a woman. Mefata is the man who seduces a woman. So we'll say in both of these cases, there's a 50 shekel penalty, 50 silver piece penalty that is paid to the father of the girl. And motzi shem Rabbi say is the man who marries a woman, and then after they are married and consummate the marriage, the husband claims that his wife was not a besula. So we'll say in that case, remember the case of motzi shem was where it turns out he's lying, then there is 100 shekel, 100 silver piece penalty that is paid. So the Gemara says these are cases of mammon. So we'll say, now it's interesting that the Gemara says these are cases of mammon. Right? Beforehand, the Gemara was using these cases as examples of knas. Why would they be cases of knas? Why? Fixed amounts. right? Fixed amounts, irrespective of who we're talking about. So we'll say, so look at Rashi. This is actually quite interesting. Rashi says over here, ones umefate demamonuhu. Rashi says, shechamishim kesef levat haveknas, aval yesh bo pigam, sheshava achsha pachos midimei kara, kedar beksuvus, uboshes amono. So we'll say, this is actually very interesting. In these cases, where a man violates a woman, or seduces a woman, or even motzi shem, Rabbi say, there are other damages that are paid. So for example, Rabbi say, in the case of a man who violates a woman, you can have physical injury. So whenever there's physical injury, again, there's nezek, there's damages. There could be refuah, there could be doctor's bills. So there are other buckets of damages. In the case of mefata, man who seduces a woman, or motzi shemra, there's boshes, there's humiliation. So interestingly enough, I will say, whereas the primary payment for ones, mefata, and motzi shemra is a fixed knas amount, that is true, but it's also possible that there are other monetary damages that come along with this as well. Because remember, again, I will say, when you get into nezek, damages, refuah, doctor bills, boshes, humiliation, these are subjective amounts, which makes it mammon. So the Gemara says again, Shaboshia, you should include these categories because although the fixed amount is a knas, the other damages involved are mammon. To which the Gemara says, so listening, manavshach. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this. Manavshach, I niski tanila. So I tsar tanile. So we'll say, so again, so the Gemara says, the truth is, Rabbi already mentioned it. How did he mention it? If you're talking about nezek, damages, Rabbi spoke about nezek. If you're talking about tsar, pain and suffering, tanile. Rabbi spoke about tsar. I boshes, if you're talking about humiliation, tanile. Ultimately, again, so we'll say, remember again, Rabbi Shia mentioned all of these categories. He mentioned nezek, tsar, refuah. He discussed all of these things. So the Gemara says, I pegam. Rabbi say, now pegam ultimately literally means like a depreciation, right? That a person's reputation has taken a hit. Hainu nezek. Ultimately, that's the same thing as nezek. My islacha lemeimar. So Rabbi say, so again, the point the Gemara is making over here is, remember, Rabbi Shia did discuss all of these things. He discussed the different categories of damages. So the only thing left to discuss, my islacha lemeimar, knasa. So the only thing left is to talk about the actual knas payment, ultimately of ones, mefat, and motzi shemer. As we said before, b'knas lo kamairi. Ultimately, Rabbi Shia is not talking about knas. Good. So successfully deflected the challenge. What about metame v'hamedama v'hamenasech timamonahu? So I'll say, what about the cases of? So I'll say, so now remember, 3 more cases in Rabbi Chia's listing. We're asking, why didn't Rabbi Shia include these? Which cases? Metame. So let's remember again, metame is the case, I go over to my friend's truma and I make it tame. Medama, I go ahead and I go over to my friend's chulin, I mix in some truma. Menasech, I make my friend's wine, yayin nesech, idolatry wine. So we'll say, the Gemara says, all of these cases are mamonahu, listening. So why doesn't Rabbi Oshia include these cases? I both say, now here's what's interesting. So look at Rashi just a moment. Medama, ma'arif truma im chulin shel chavero, dahashta mazbin lebezol lefin sheyochel ochla elakoin. I both say, now when you make something, now obviously, so when you make truma tameh, so both say, then obviously the loss is clear. What's the loss? What can you do with truma tameh? What can you do with truma tameh? Burn it. Not the kids do anything with it. So we'll say, that's a complete loss. That's a complete loss. Midame, no, both say, what do you do if I go over to my Yisrael friend's produce and I mix in some truma? So we'll say, so now what could he do with that mixture? What could he do with the mixture? He could sell it to a Kohen. But because a Kohen knows that the seller, right, the Yisrael seller can't do anything with it, what is he going to do? He'll buy it, but he'll buy it at what? A very steep discount. So therefore there's a financial loss in that. And Menasech, I will say ultimately again, Menasech, Rashi says over here, Shenisech yayin chaver la'avodah zara va'aslu ba'ana hol v'avar b'maiseh. So we'll say, so remember again, Menasech is also, Menasech like Metame is complete loss. Complete loss, right? Because now anything that's avodah zarah, you can't get hana from it. So I will say, so b'pashtos, these are all cases of mammon. If they're cases of mammon, so Rabbi Shia, why don't you include it in your listing? Listening, so Gemara said manavshach. So manavshach, hezik. So I will say, watch this. Now here's what's interesting about what I will say about these cases. What's the common denominator between metame, medame, and menasech? Rabbi will say it's what's called hezek she'eno nikar. It's unrecognizable damage. right? Remember again, you've changed the item, but externally, the item looks no difference, right? You can't tell that the truma is tameh. You can't tell that the chulin has truma mixed into it, and you can't tell that this is now libational wine. Right? In other words, I must say, this fascinating discussion. So, hezek she'eino nikar is unrecognizable damage considered to be damage in halacha or not? So the Gemara says, so marashach, I hezek she'eino nikar shmei hezek, hatanale nezek. So if you hold that unrecognizable damage is still called nezek, then okay, Rabbi Shia does have that included. Rabbi say, where is it included? It's included under the category ultimately of nezek. The Gemara says, "I hazek she'eino nikar lo shmei hazek havele knasa ubiknasa lo kamari." And if you hold that hazek she'eino nikar unrecognizable damage is not damage, then I will say if it's not damages, then what is it? It's knas. And if it's knas, then ultimately, as I said before, Rabbi Shia is not including knas in his listing. Incredible. So we'll say, so let's go weiter. Lema kasav Rabbi Chia, hezek she'eino nikar lo shmei hezek. It must be that Rabbi Chia holds that unrecognizable damage is not called damage. Di'i shtei shmei hezek hatanile nezek. So we'll say, so ultimately again, if at the end of the day it was called hezek, then why wouldn't he include it? To which the Gemara says, Tana hezek de minkara, the Tana hezek de lo minkara. Ultimately again, because we'll say, now, the Gemara is talking about Rabbi Chia, right? According to Rabbi Chia, so at the end of the day, it must be, now we're switching gears just a second, it must be that Rabbi Chia holds hezek she'eino nikar as lo shmei hezek, right? That unrecognizable damage is not called damage. It's not called nezek. Why? Because if it was called nezek, then at the end of the day, he would not have needed to mention these cases. Because remember, again, he's already included in the case of Rabbi Shia. In the case of Rabbi Shia, we already have the concept of nezek, and these cases would be included. The fact that Rabbi Chia felt the need to explicitly articulate these cases of metame, medame, menasech, indicates to us what? That he holds hezek she'eino nikar is lo shmei hezek, unrecognizable damage is not damage. These cases are knas cases, and Rabbi Chia is including them because they are knas cases. So the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Tana has zeka de minkara, the Tana has zeka de lo minkara. We'll say not necessarily. It could very well be that Rabbi Chia is just choosing to highlight two different types of damages. He highlights recognizable damage and unrecognizable damage. So remember again, he's building on the categories of Rabbi Shia. So in the categories of Rabbi Shia, you have the concept of nezek. Nezek refers to recognizable damage. And then he includes all of these other cases. Why? Because they are cases of unrecognizable damage. Okay, beautiful. Bishol Tana Didan. So I'll say, so fine. So I'll say, so now, here we have it. So I'll say, so now it turns out that we have three different models of counting the categories of damage. We have our Mishnah, 4 categories. We have Rabbi Shia, 13 categories. And we have Rabbi Chia, 24 categories. In Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shia, wherein lies the distinction? Very simply, Rabbi Chia is including knas cases. Rabbi Shia is not including knas cases. Beautiful. Now I'll say, now that we have all of that, what's going to be the next question? Whenever you have a number, I will say, right? Whenever you have a number, so numbers do two things, right? Number one, they include. Number 2, they exclude. So including, I know, because remember again, each particular opinion includes the listing of what they are including. Now the shaila is going to be, what are they excluding? So watch this, it's fascinating. Bishlo Tana Didan, so I'll say our Tana, which means our Mishnah. Arba Avos Nezikin, our Mishnah, 4 categories. So Bishlo Tana Didan, Tana Minyana Lemiute Draboshia. So we'll say our Tana includes his number, ultimately again to go ahead and exclude Raboshia. Right? That ultimately again, as we saw in yesterday's daf, ultimately again, our Tana rejects the count of Raboshia. Fine. Raboshia, Tana Minyana Lemiute Draboshia. And I will say, Rabbi Yoshia's number does what? Excludes Rabbi Chia. That's what we just said before. Remember again, specifically, what is he excluding in Rabbi Chia? What is he excluding? All of the knas cases. But I will say, however, interesting. So it's Rabbi Chia, you've got 24 categories of nezikin. So now I know what you're including. You're including mamon, you're including knas, you're including recognizable hezek, unrecognizable hezek. I got all that. What are you excluding? What are you excluding? What are you excluding? I would say, it's interesting. It's a good Musar Haskell that, right, a number includes and excludes. I will say, in life, there's like 2 buckets. There are the things that you stand for and the things that you repudiate. Now, the challenge is, very often in life, people like to define themselves by what they're not. Right? I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. Because defining yourself by what you're not is much easier than defining yourself through what you are. Right? So in life, I have to be able to identify, what do I stand for? Right? What are the values I have? Who am I in a positive fashion? That's the minyana. Right? Here's the listing of things that are me. Right? Here are the values. Here are the values that I stand for. Now let's say, but you also have to have the things that you reject. Right? That I don't allow for this. I reject this. I repudiate this. I take a stand against this. Now let's say, isn't it like we see this happening? Right? You see this happening. It's incredible to say, I saw the most overwhelming article yesterday that there is now a coalition of universities under the leadership of Yeshiva University. They've created a coalition of universities that are safe haven for Jews. A coalition of universities that are safe haven for Jews. They happen to, I think most of them are Catholic universities. Right? Safe haven for Jews. Let's say, do you understand what that means? Do you understand what that means? That means that our society, America, our society, college campuses, have lost sight of a value system. That people that universities lack the backbone to go ahead and say anti-Semitism doesn't have a place on a college campus. That you cannot harass Jews. That you're not, let's say, remember again, if it was any other minority, right? If it was the African American community, if it was the Muslim community, everybody would be all over this stuff, right? Like, there'd be statements that Jews could be harassed, right? Jews, something I will say, and by the way, it's a wake-up call, because if any Jewish family contemplates sending their child, right, to a secular university, be careful where your dollars go. Be careful where your dollars go. And be careful that you are not supporting active anti-Semitism in its ugliest, rawest form. See, I will say, people can't even repudiate evil. Right? You saw this. They can't even repudiate Hamas. They can't even repudiate barbarism. They can't even repudiate anti-Semitism. That's the thing it's teaching us. If you can't take a stand, you have to learn how to take stands for things, and you also have to learn how to take stands against things. If you can't stand up against evil, if you can't take a stand against things that are wrong, you're nothing. You're nothing. You are a waste of space and a waste of life. If you can't stand up when evil looks you in the face, then the truth is, you're just a two-legged animal at the end. Because animals also don't take stands, right? What happens when somebody comes into the grazing space of animals? I mean, I actually have no idea what happens. Right? But let me say, I would assume that, okay, whatever, the animal just moves on, right? Moves on somewhere else. There's another grazing space. And let's say, if you can't take a stand, and that's the Mishnah saying, right? Minyana, right? Whenever there's a listing says two things. I stand for this. This is what I believe in. But every listing also has, and I reject this. And I reject this. That there has to be a coalition of universities for safe space for Jews. I was reading one of the comments in the articles. It says, this sounds like once again, there were righteous Gentiles who hid Jews. This is what we're up to. That in 2023, we have to create a coalition of safe spaces. But I just want to say, but that's what happens when you have such a lack of a moral backbone that you can't stand up against evil. Then at the end of the day, everything just becomes like this amorphous blob of nothingness. And they'll say, where do we learn this from? This is it. The number says, I stand for this and I repudiate this. And if you're not able to repudiate negative things in this world, you're not a mensch. The Mishnah goes weiter. And all from Rabbi Chia. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? So we'll say the number of Rabbi Chia. What is Rabbi Chia coming to exclude? So Gemara says moser umefagel. So we'll say it's coming to exclude the case of moser. Case we'll say moser is someone who gives a Jew over to the government. Now, as a result of giving a Jew over to the government, then halacha l'maisa, ultimately again, it causes him to lose money. Mefagel, we'll say, is a Kohen who goes ahead and has an erroneous intention in order to go and invalidates a carbon. So the Gemara is l'me'ute moser mefagel. I have a listening, so why not include these cases? In other words, say, so Rabbi Chia, this is what Rabbi Chia is excluding. He's excluding moser, which is again one Jew hands another Jew over to the government, which is aser, but in addition to being aser, could also cause a financial loss. So ultimately, again, he's not including that case. And mefagel, a Kohen who makes a carbon pigel, and thereby again renders it useless, the owner would have to bring another carbon. I have a listening, so why not include those cases? So bishlam and mefagel b'kachol kamari. I understand Rabbi Chia doesn't bring in pigel. Why? Because Rabbi Chia is not dealing with karbanos. Ela moser might time a low tani, but why not bring in the case of moser? Right? Why not bring in the case of moser? The dibura, because we'll say the case of moser is a case of dibur. Remember again, how do you give over another Jew to the government? How are you doing that? Through speech. Through speech. Obedibura lo kamairi. And we'll say again, Rabbi Chia is talking about actional cases, not just about cases where all there is a verbal component. Okay? So we say, I have a hamosi shemra de diburuhu, but that's not true. Mosi shemra is a dibur case. Right, in Mosi Shemra, again, the husband is making a claim against his wife that ultimately, again, she is not a basula. To which the Gemara says, "Dibura di ispe maisu." No. Now remember, when is he making the claim? He's making a claim after they consummated the marriage. So there is a maisa. There is a maisa. I have a ha'idim zomin dibura de lespe maisa. But Rabbi Chia, you're including edim zomin, and edim zomin is a case of speech without action. Vikatani hasam. The Gemara says v'lespe maisahu vikatani, and it's included hasam afagav v'lespe maiser achmona karye maiser. So we'll say edim zomin is interesting. Why? Because edim zomin, even though there is no maiser, there is no action by edim zomin, the Torah calls their action an action. An action where the chsiv v'asisem lo kasher zomam la'asos li'achid. So at the end of the day, even though halacha l'maisa, you're right, edim zomin is just dibur, it's just speech. But halacha l'maisa, the Torah calls it a maisa, therefore Rabbi Chia includes it. So I'll say, so just to be clear, so essentially, we understand the Mishnah is coming to exclude Rabbi Oshia. Rabbi Oshia is coming to exclude or reject the cases of Rabbi Chia. What is Rabbi Chia coming to exclude? So two cases. Number one, mifagel, making a carbon pigel. If a kohen makes a carbon pigel, that's not included in this. Why not? Because he's not dealing with kachim cases. And moser. Why doesn't he include moser? I will say because mesira is dibur. It's just speech. And Rabbi Chia is only including cases which ultimately, again, have an actional component. What about Edim Zomin? Edim Zomin doesn't have an actual component, it's only speech. You're right, but the Torah calls it actional. Torah says, la'asos. Fine, beautiful. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Bishal Tana Didan, Tana Avos Michladi Ikatoldos. So we'll say, so remember again, our Tana and our Mishnah use Lashon of Avos. Avos means that what? That there are toldos, that there are secondary cases as well. So the Gemara says, El Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Oshia, Avos Michlal Di'ika toldos. Toldos say in Mainihu. Rabbi say, but here's the problem. According to Rabbi Chia, which is the 24 cases, so Rabbi Chia also used Lashon of Avos. Avos makes it sound like that what? That there are toldos. So toldos sehen my nihu. So Rabbi said, at the end of the day, what are the toldos? Out of these 24 cases, what are the toldos? So I'm Rabbi Avo. Rabbi Avo says, you're right. Rabbi Chia, Rabbi say, doesn't use avos in the classical sense. Generally, avos means a primary category, which means what? That there's a secondary category as well. That's not how he's using avos. He's using avos in a different way to teach me. Kulan kabos shleimah meitav. He says avos means that in all of these cases, when you pay damages, you pay from the best of your property. My taima asyatachos nesina yishalem and kasef. So I will say, so it's interesting. When Rabbi Chia uses lashon of avos, he doesn't mean avos in that there are toldos as well. Rather, he means avos ultimately to teach me that when I pay from the best property. Why? Because in all of these cases, you have one of the following words. Tachas, nesina, yishalem, and kasef. And those very same words are found in the context of damages, paying from meitav, paying from the best of your property. Beautiful. So the Gemara goes weiter. So we'll say, recording now the next piece of the Mishnah. So we'll remember again now the Mishnah made. Now remember, we're back to our Mishnah. Arba avos nezikin, shar, ox and all of its, tentacles, right? Bar, pit, mave, machlokis Rav and Shmuel. Is it Adam or is it Shane? And hever, which is Eish, fire. So remember again, the Mishnah said, Lo Harei Shekara Ma'av. And my Kamma, what is the Mishnah saying? Amar Zecharya, Amar Zvid, Mishnei Derava, Hagim. That's what it means to say. Lichtov Rachmana Chada v'tisi idach minei. Mishnah is saying you only have to write one of them and you can learn the other one from it. So Hadar Amar Chada Michada Lo Asya. Then the Mishnah says, no. When it comes to the Arba Avos Nazikin, you could not learn one out from the other. Fine. Zev v'zeh shava Zev v'lo Zev v'zeh sheish ban ruach Chaim. We'll say furthermore again, Shar and Mava, both are living things. Now remember, no matter how you come out on the Mave discussion, right? Whether Mave is Shane or Mave is Adam, either way, what are we talking about? A living thing. So we'll say, so on one hand, Shar and Mave are unique, right? They're different than Bar, right? They are different than Bar and Hever, right? Why? Because Bar and Hever are both inanimate. So Gemara says this also. We'll say, my Kamma, what is the Mishnah saying? This is what it means to say. We'll say it's incredible. Lichtov, I'm a base. Lichtov. You were nervous. I got this. That's what I'll say. So now watch this. So the Gemara says as follows. This is what the Mishnah is saying. Lichtov Rachmana Tarti. So we'll say, so let the Torah write, let the Torah write two of the items. For example, Shar and Mava. Write those two. Shar and Mava, right? Shar, right? Remember again, is Keren, Shane, Regel, right? So let the Torah write Shar, damages the Shar, and Mave. Whatever, whether Mave is Adam or Shane, whichever one it is, right? So let the Torah write Shar, let the Torah write Shar, Mave, V'tisi idach, and you can learn out the other one, whether the other one is, let's go with Eish, let's see, Rashi points out, right? And you can learn out Eish from them. How would you learn it out? So the Gemara will say, V'tisi idach minahu. And ultimately, again, you can learn out the other one from it. Hadar Amar, therefore, what does the Gemara say? Or what does the Mishnah say? Chada mitarti lo asi. No, you can't even learn out one from two. In other words, we'll say, so there's a progression in the Mishnah. Originally, the Mishnah thought maybe we could learn out each of the categories of damages, one from the other. You can't learn out one from one. Fine, we'll get it back into that just in a moment. Then the Mishnah says, well, let's go ahead and create two as a paradigm, and then learn out the others from those two. Which two? Let's group Shar and Mavet together, and then learn out Ish from them. To which the Gemara says, that doesn't work. We'll see why it doesn't work in just a moment. Amar Rava, v'kulu kishadis bar binayu asya v'kulu b'ma'atzad. So we'll say, Levad mi Karen. So we'll say, so the truth is, it's not true. Rava says like this. You could create a paradigm. As long as you include bar in the paradigm, you can learn out everything else from one of them plus bar, with the exception of Karen. Okay, we'll say, how does this work? Watch this. Mishum di'ikal mifrach. So I'll say, actually, before we go on, take a look at Rashi. Kishadis bar benayo asya, if you take almost like right across, iksiv bar v'chada mehanach asya kulu me'ahu v'idach. So we'll say, if the Torah were to list bar, and any one of the other ones, you can learn out the rest. How so? B'tzara shava. Tiksiv bar v'karen asya shein minahu. But say, had the Torah, for example, written bar and karen, you could have learned out the rest from that. For example, bar is stationary, right? So bar doesn't go on and damage, and yet you're chayiv. Shein shedarko lahazik lo kol shekein. So shein, ultimately, again, which does have the derech to go ahead and damage, certainly would be liable. So what the Gemara is suggesting is like this. You could create a paradigm of bar and any other one, and you could learn out the rest from there, with the exception of keren. Why? Because by keren, mishum de'ikal mifrach, malakulhu shekemu adim mitchilasan. Because I will say again, remember in all the other cases, namely everything other than Karen is the only item through which there is a distinction between Tam and Muad. Everything else is considered to be Muad from the beginning. Right? Remember again, bar, your chayiv first time damages, right? Fire, first time damages. Adam, if Mave is Adam, first time damages. Ulaman da Amar Adraba, Karen Adifa, Shekavanasa Lahazik, Afilu Karen Nami Asya. So we'll say at the end of the day, in the opinion that holds that Karen is even stronger, why? Because we'll say certainly Karen is going to be chayiv. Why? Because by Karen, we'll say Karen is the one case where there's intent to damage. So we'll say, now watch this. So here's what we have, just very quickly outside. Here's what we have. Essentially what the Gemara is saying is like this. you don't need to list all 4 categories of damages, right? Remember again, our Mishnah tells us, Arba Avos Nazikin. There's Shar, Ox, Bar, Pit, Maveh, Adam or Shane, Haver, Eish. The point of the Gemara over here is, you didn't need to list all 4. I could have listed Bar and 1 other, and I could have learned out the rest of that from there. Now, I will say, the fact that the Mishnah lists all 4, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? That the Mishnah is trying to make a point. Anytime you don't have to say something, but you say it, it's being said ultimately again to make a point. So the Gemara says, you're right. So I'll say, so why does ultimately again the Torah explicitly articulate every single one of the 4 primary categories of damages in order to make a point? What's the point? We'll say, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up Eretz Hashem with this Gemara tomorrow. So we'll say, so tomorrow, it's actually very interesting. So now, we're going to go through each of the 4 primary categories as listed in our Mishnah, and ultimately, again, highlight the unique features of each, showing us why each of them needed to be listed. All right, we'll say, also we'll say, there is the Shiva Minyan, the Kent Shiva Minyan now is also taking place at 6:45 a.m. You can see our learner for the address right around the corner. What's the address?
Yes, the last morning. We could probably use a few people. You want to go?